years old the first time I had any idea that my family might be different. We had just moved to Ohio from Tulsa. Backed up to our house was another. They had a boy about my age, and we began playing in the backyard. He invited me over to his house, and when I got there, I was introduced to his parents. When I began to move my hands to communicate like I always did with my parents. They were very confused. They began speaking with their mouths. But parents don't speak with their mouths, I thought. Later on, I went home and told my parents about my friends' parents who used their mouths to speak. My mom, who was unbelievably calm at this new development, sat me down at the dining room table, knocked on it, and asked if I could hear that. I said yes. She said, "Dad and I can't. We're deaf. You are a KODA, a child of deaf adults." To my memory, that was the first time I ever heard the word deaf, let alone explained to me. I would later learn society had a different view of my family than I did. A view they saw as a limitation was actually our strength and our identity. I love the icebreaker, tell us something interesting about yourself. Mine was always the most interesting. It always brought up the same questions, some good, some funny, some just dumb, like, can your parents drive? Yes, they can drive. Can they read? Yes, my parents can read. Did you listen to music really loud? Yeah, I did that. Did you sneak out? With friends, I did. Your house must have been really quiet. It was absolutely not. We were probably the loudest house on the block. One question I always got asked was, what was it like growing up with deaf parents? And my answer is always, I don't know. Because I don't. My life was normal from my perspective. All you people with hearing parents are the weird ones. Us CODAs are a small population. We're members of two communities, but sometimes we don't feel like we belong in either. In his 1982 book, A Life with Two Languages, An Introduction to Bilingualism, Francois Grosjean likens us CODAs to children of immigrants, rather than our hearing peers. Much like the immigrant parents who speak the native language at home, the children who also speak that language at home, but also the dominant language of the community around them. Us CODAs walk a cultural tightrope. In his 1994 book, Paul Preston, a CODA himself, wrote, "We are neither deaf nor hearing, we are both deaf and hearing." There are two types of deaf people in the world. Little d deaf, people who have hearing loss, who don't use ASL, don't interact with the deaf community, may see their hearing loss as a disability. Then we have big D deaf, people who are culturally deaf, who use ASL. What makes deaf culture different? First, let's ask what constitutes culture. According to Merriam-Webster, culture is the customary beliefs, social forms, material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. Deaf people have history. We have deaf art, deaf media, deaf theater, deaf stories, a sense of community with local deaf clubs, athletic organizations, state and national associations as well. The deaf community is a collectivist culture, much like Native American tribes and other ethnic minorities in the US. The deaf look out for other deaf by sharing deaf-friendly businesses, such as car dealerships, even coffee shops with baristas that sign. If a business gives a deaf person a hard time, you can guarantee the rest of the community will know about it and boycott. Most deaf community members likely went to residential schools for the deaf. For many, this is where they met their first fellow deaf person. They learned sign language, the customs, the norms of their classmates, and began their journey into the deaf world. 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. It is typical for a deaf child to be the only deaf family member, as are my parents. Sometimes being isolated due to the communication barrier, they tend to relate and connect closer with other deaf individuals rather than their own family. Now let's look at the language. The common misconception is that ASL is English on the hands. Thanks to the work of Dr. William Stokey in the 1960s, he showed that ASL has its own syntax and grammar, a unique and individual language. Not every English word will have a sign. Not every sign will have an English word. In ASL, we think conceptually and abstractly, using space to convey distance, time, location, contrast ideas. Sign language is the most important part of deaf culture, a language connecting individuals from various deaf backgrounds. But access to this language in everyday life is sometimes hindered by the majority. This past January, one of my parents had a medical emergency that required 15 days in the hospital. My sister and I called the hospital separately the day it happened, informing that our parent was deaf and that we needed a live in-person interpreter. It took them 48 hours to fulfill that request. We were not in a rural community. We were here in Tulsa. They assured us they had an interpreter service on site, and when we got there, they had basically an iPad on wheels that they would just call the service every time they came in. This is not convenient for a deaf individual and their family. This is only convenient for the hearing community. So why didn't my siblings or I interpret for our parents? Yes, the three of us can sign. We can sign. We've been signing since before we could speak. But to ask a CODA to interpret a medical emergency where they're still processing what's happening to their parent, we can't be there as a son or daughter. We cannot be neutral. There are stories of CODAs interpreting for their parents dying and not being able to grieve because they were having to work. When a deaf person requests an interpreter, it's seen as a disability. When a Spanish, German, Italian speaker requests one, it's not. Where's the difference? Interpreters are there for the hearing, not for the deaf. My parents are not disabled. Deaf people as a cultural group are not disabled. A deaf person can be disabled, but it is not their deafness that is the disability. As a CODA, I've witnessed people look down on my parents because of their deafness, because they're different or disabled. This is the hardest thing about being a CODA, to witness strangers judge our family because we communicate differently. Both my parents have careers. We had a house, 2 cars. My siblings and I played sports, participated in school activities, sleepovers with friends, went on vacations. All the things my friends with hearing parents got to do, we did the same. Where's the difference? As a CODA, I've got to live in both worlds. I still straddle that ridge, some days fitting in better with one than the other. But being on that ridge is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I've got to see my own culture, understand my own culture, and see that all diverse worlds and the cultures are all incredible and each their own and deserve to be celebrated. Some suggestions to looking out. Oklahoma School for the Deaf offers free online classes you can do each year at your own pace. Learn the alphabet. Learn how to introduce yourself. Don't restrict yourself just to ASL. Let's bring about a new wave of inclusivity and connection. Thank you.